All right. We are live. Tim Rhode, welcome to the Future of Fitness.
Thank you very much, Eric. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And, first and foremost, I want to say thank you to Doug Bopst, right? He is the host of the Adversity Advantage podcast. Great podcast. He connected us originally. And, I'm excited to get into your head. There's so much knowledge and experience that you have. I mean, 25 plus years experience within the fitness and health club industry. So that's something. And now, I think you're leveraging, you'll tell the audience better than I can, you're leveraging your experience to help leaders, business leaders specifically, create change, right? And more importantly, like progress is what we all want, right? But generally to get progress in our endeavors, we need change. And change isn't always easy. And a lot of times, as you were telling me prior to recording here, it's like people kind of shoot from the hip when it comes to creating change within their organizations, within their teams. But you actually built out a framework, which is wonderful because that saves people a lot of time and energy and heartache when trying to run these companies and their businesses. So I'm going to kind of shut up for now, but maybe you could give us a little bit of your background, Tim, and how we'll talk about your book and all that stuff, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I've been in the fitness industry since more like 1979, 80. And I was working in and around tennis and racquetball clubs and learned the business. We became members of IRSA in like 1984. I was actually a vendor and was an original equipment manufacturer for the industry when I wound up taking over a struggling health club in suburban DC in 1986, I think. And then that turned around really well and really quickly. I wound up doing work and presentations and speaking engagements in the fitness industry, ran the Regional Trade Association for Fitness, and then was eventually a member of the IRSA board of directors, where I had the pleasure to work with some of the industry leaders from around the world and chaired the strategic planning committee for a while. And then in the mid to late 90s, I started my own consulting firm. And eventually my wife and I, who's also from the industry, launched our own health club. And it was designed to either avoid or revise a lot of the struggles and challenges that fitness operators we'd been consulting were facing, or clubs that we had managed for others, right? So we launched the MAC, the Maryland Athletic Club and Wellness Center, back in 1996, and it became an industry leader in just a few years. We eventually grew that to three sites in the Baltimore, Maryland market, and ran them for 20 years and exited in late 2015. And I returned to consulting since then. We had an opportunity to exit to a couple of different buyers and decided to get back to just a little bit more freedom with our lifestyle, where our kids were going and everything. So since then I've been working as a business consultant, not just with fitness businesses, but across other industries, using this approach to transformation or change, because all progress requires change. And as I looked at what I'd wrestled with or, done successfully or struggled with over the years, I realized that there was a way to simplify change and to get the fear and the challenge and the uncertainty out of it. So that eventually evolved into the changing lanes approach, which is what I've been using lately, last 2 to 3 years with my clients. I have an online coaching program, and I just published a book with the same title.
Right on. Well, you've got a lot under your belt, Tim. That's for sure. And I want to get into change. So progress requires change. It sounds kind of obvious, right? But maybe, and I always like to do this through storytelling, like, as a business executive that you've been and so many that you work with, like, what are some of the most common forms of change that you see across business organizations that need to happen, right? That maybe are difficult for leaders to engage in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, probably the one that's the most common is changing your mindset, changing the way you look at change. And, not to beat that concept to death, but most people resist or are reluctant to change. Like change comes with it some sort of a apprehension at the very least, like, oh, great, here we go again. Or maybe it's not to you. Some leaders are enthusiastic about change, but the people around them, run for cover, or they wonder how it's going to affect them, and they don't assume it's going to be in a good way. Customers resist change. Every time I hear my phone's going through an upgrade, I go like, oh, great. Like I don't look forward to it because I know something's going to stop working. So on the whole, we're largely conditioned to be apprehensive and maybe even resist change. And that doesn't have to be the case. The reason that I call the program Changing Lanes for Business is it's very simple and easy to remember, right? Two is something that people already know how to do. Like if you can drive, you've changed lanes. And if you haven't been left on the side of the road in a wreck, you've figured out how to do it successfully, right? And three is nobody changes lanes to do worse, right? When's the last time you changed lanes to do worse? You usually, you invariably, you change to do better. You either want to go faster, get out of traffic, or you want to get over to your exit or something like that. So it's just, the secret sauce behind this approach is that subliminally, it's something people do to improve. That notion that all progress requires change is not a connection that people tend to make automatically. They all want progress, yet most people resist change. Well, there's a breakdown there. So if we can just make that connection, and I'm just kind of explaining the philosophy behind the program, then people look forward to change and they lean into progress and they accelerate it. They don't resist it, for a host of reasons. So, but the biggest one that I see most often is in the mindset, right? Which I just kind of gave you a backup. And other times it has to do with a process or communication is huge. On the front end of it, it's harsh to call it thoughtlessness, but it's moving into the process or an approach or determination to change without thinking it all the way through. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. That's what the program does. It really shrinks us down to asking and answering a few questions. It gets clarity, certainty, and the confidence that it takes to move forward and then communicate to others, which is like signaling when you're changing lanes, right? You're letting others know that this is coming and here you come, and right, and then actually doing it. So the 4 steps really approach those 4 primary hurdles that people face when they're trying to make progress.
Can we walk through those steps? I'd like to hear them.
Sure.
Maybe even like an example of,
Yep.
you don't have to name names, but some organization or business leader you work with. I like it in an anecdote.
You bet. Well, the first one is the first one for a reason, and it's where most change efforts run off the rails right from the start. And it's funny because when I started doing this, I almost overlooked it, and it points us out in the book. But the very first thing that happens when you need to make progress is you need to decide to change. The same thing happens when you're driving. You need to decide to change. Most people take that for granted, and it's when you fail to decide that you wind up getting stuck in traffic. You waited too long. You didn't see far enough ahead. You didn't, we've all been trapped in traffic going, damn, I wish I'd have seen this before, changed lanes sooner, wasn't distracted, whatever the case might be. Or maybe you looked ahead and you saw there was a need or an opportunity to change, but you were reluctant because you weren't sure you could, you didn't know. So the first step is decide to change. And there's a host of reasons why people fail to decide. I'm not talking about when somebody decides not to change, right? That's a decision. But when you don't decide, right, you fail to decide to change, you fail to make that decision thoughtfully, thoroughly, appropriately, that's when change either doesn't happen, it doesn't even get started, or it happens and immediately runs off the rails because it was made without proper perspective, right? So just a few questions that business leaders can ask and answer themselves to make a good call. So I don't think there's been a single person through the coaching program that hasn't had a revelation when they're going through this process. And it's precisely what we do in the absence of a reliable approach to change. We use our experience, we use our own instincts, right? Which is good. It's gotten us to this point. That's what we've got, right? That's what we wake up with. But without taking, it's kind of like changing lanes without looking, right? So you need to see what's coming, where there's an opportunity to accelerate, to make progress, or where there's a need to, like, holy cow, if I don't do this now, I'm going to miss this opportunity, right? and then going through the motions, asking yourself these questions so that you can decide, I'm making the change. You might not know yet. You probably don't know yet which way, when, how far, how fast, but this is going to change, right? So that's the first step. And most business owners don't, or business leaders, even managers, assistant managers, even team leaders have been through the program, have been like, holy cow, this gives me so much clarity. Now I know that I need to change, and I know that I'm going to change. Now the next step then is to look, right? You look for options and risks. So you're driving in traffic. This lane sucks. It's not doing what I want or need. I need to be over there, right? But I'm getting out of this lane. So the next step is to look, should I go left? Should I go right? Should I go now? Should I go later? Should I go fast, or is it time to slow down? Right. So those are all similes or analogies to the questions that get put into a business context in the book or in the coaching program. And you look around for, I call it look for options and risks. Right. And so what's the best way to go? Who needs to be involved with this? Should I get other people's input? And then once you've got that, you know now, yes, I'm changing, and I'm going to do it this way, this fast with these people. This is going to work. You've got a high level of confidence. You've got people on board. You got support. The third step is to signal. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, question. So that's like essentially this phase 2, Tim, is like the due diligence, right? You're doing the research, you're looking, you're kind of just gathering as much as you can. Because I find like change is kind of like making decisions, and part of it is at least making decisions, right? And like I look at my wife and I, we have very different frameworks for making decisions. Like I will to beat it to death looking for different options and looking for things, and probably overdo it, right? She'll like look at a couple things, be like, nope, that's it. Let's just do it. Move forward, don't look back, and go, right? And I'm like, oh God, but there's a couple more things, a couple more people I want to talk to, right? So is that part of that step 2 is like understanding also how you make a decision? Yeah, give me some insights on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the fact that you've decided to change doesn't mean that you know how or when, or that you've got the confidence to pull it off. So you need to look a little further. But in the fitness business, this would be the equivalent of deciding that it's time to get in better shape. And so you're going to do it. You kind of make the New Year's resolution. Like, I'm not going to stay like this next year. I'm not going to be in this kind of shape. You don't know if you're going to join the gym, if you're going to do it on your own or whatever, or if in a business context, that it's time for you to add a sales team, or it's time for you to get going with your digital marketing or your media, or it's time for you to replace your controller or your fitness director or whatever the case may be. You've made that decision. You don't know exactly how yet. So now it's time to figure out your best options and what are the risks. Like if I do I fire this person and then find somebody? Do I wait to find somebody and then fire this person? What's going to happen? So there's a host of other questions. It is due diligence. The way that you put it is really good. That's exactly what happens in that phase. I worked with I used to co-instruct with a guy who was just terrific. I loved the sessions we did together. He used to tell a great story. So at one point in time, he was living in the Pacific Northwest, not too far from you, and he and his wife were going to move to the East Coast. They were moving out here to Virginia, and there were so many things that had to happen, but he didn't know, like, when they just decided to move, but he didn't know when, he didn't know what they were going to move into, and he didn't even know where in Virginia they were going to move. And once they picked Charlottesville, the way he tells the story is that like a lot of people want to go from A to not A. And until you know where's B, that's what we call the presentation. It's called Finding B, or Where is B, right? So until you know where B is, all you can do is go from A to not A. Well, that describes the fitness industry, like the fitness customers, perfectly, right? And we were working with fitness trainers, personal trainers. The two of us were working with 150 personal trainers in 5 different states. And we were trying to help them build their businesses to get from A to B. And most of them knew they wanted to go from A to not A. They were making $5,000 a month and they wanted to make $10,000 a month, or they didn't know what B was. They didn't know how they were going to get there, right? So finding B was our shorthand for, let's figure out where you want to go. And the way he finishes his story is, once he knew they were going from, Seattle, Washington to or Spokane, I think it was, to Charlottesville, Virginia. He could go rent the truck. He could pick out the route. They could decide whether they were pulling a trailer, were they going to drive it themselves, were they going to take the northern route, the central route, the southern route, right? And all of a sudden, like, I can still see the guy's map, because all of a sudden there was a way to get from where he was to where he wanted to be. And so that's really key for people in this step 2, is to figure out where's B, and now we can put a plan together to get there.
Right on. Okay, so we have decide to change, look for options and risks, right? And then next is what?
Signal. Just like driving, just like changing lanes. I'm getting out of this lane. All right, I'm going that way. Now I put on my signal, and you put it on with the right timing, and you make sure the right people know it, right? At least you should signal. So you were asking earlier, like, where does this run off the rails? Okay, so we've all seen the idiots that change lanes without signaling, and that are likely to cause a wreck. And I'm sure that none of the people on this call have ever changed lanes without signaling, right? But
I'm
we know
just
other
because
people who have, right?
I was driving with my friend the other day, and we were coming back from a trip, and I didn't signal. I was going around a semi, and he's like, "Oh, did you not get the blinker package on your truck?" I was like,
"Yeah, we're all guilty."
I guess I am that guy. Yeah,
we are all guilty. But here's a point that I make with step 3 is signal, and it's that at the root of every problem is poor communication. Everyone. I don't care whether it's a dispute with your wife, a problem with a customer, something with a vendor, you name it. It could be the leak in your faucet. At some point, there's poor communication is at the heart of every single problem. So I make a big deal out of this and say, look, let's signal. And I try to make it easy. So, everybody wants, if you ask everybody, well, how many of you are poor communicators? You probably wouldn't get a hand. And yet we all know that we drop the ball on this all the time. We communicate incompletely. We miss people. We're late. We're early. There's all we confuse people. And this is not like a college course in communication. It's 2 or 3. It's a checklist of who should you contact, like whose help will you need, and whose help will help. That's 2 different questions. Those are 2 of the top questions, right? So who do you need to communicate with, when, and how, right? And so how, people don't realize there's face-to-face communication, there's direct, which might not be in person, but it might be like you and I are talking on a Zoom call right now. It could be a phone call, but you're doing them the honor of talking to them one-on-one. And then the when is really key. How many times people resist change because they weren't contacted first, or you didn't ask for their input, right? That's a big part of it, right? So one of the biggest ways, one of the things we cover sort of through all the steps is how to overcome resistance to change, because it's everywhere, right? Resistance, reluctance, foot dragging, right? So one of the most important things to realize, this is human nature, is that people will support what they help to create.
Yeah.
Really key. If you get people involved with the creation, which can start all the way back in step 1 and certainly in step 2, and you can't miss with step 3 with the communication. So people support what they help to create. Unfortunately, the opposite is also true. So if they don't have a hand in creating it, they're going to be more skeptical, more reluctant, more resistant, they're going to hide. They're going to do what, maybe it's not malicious, but they're probably not going to be helping. So with communicating properly and timely and in the right manner, you can really grease the skids for your change to work. Again, this is all so simple. It's just like changing lanes in your car. The whole program is designed to simplify things. Whether you use the program or the approach or not, I think just listening to this, people would get it. And the idea is use your signal to make sure that you can change lanes safely and in the time frame that you want. So that's step 3. It's all about communication: who, how, and when.
Yeah, it comes to mind because this is recent experience of mine over the past 3-4 months. So I work with Shane Farmer at Dark Horse Rowing, and it's been long overdue that we've created a new product, which is a new app, for our clients and consumers to engage in the content and the programming and the overall experience of Dark Horse Rowing. And it's been a 6-month process. We just launched over, Black Friday, hugely successful. Super excited, right, to see all that work come in and launch. But everyone on the team had input into the product. right? And he hasn't had a new product in 3 or 4 years. So it was like from the program design to the layout to the color schemes, everybody on the team had input. And the motivation, the excitement around this product is something that I've been working with them for, 3 years. I haven't seen it before. Like everyone's fired up, right? Everyone's cheering. And it's just such a cool experience in that, I don't think, to your point, I don't think it would have landed that way if it was like, boom, here's the product, guys, we're launching next week,
Yeah.
right? But having that process there was really interesting. So that's a really powerful point that I think is very commonly overlooked.
It's a perfect case, perfect example, and I agree that there's no question in my mind that it would not have gone as well if you hadn't had everybody involved. And it's just is so easy to do. If you go all the way back to that my first experience running a club in the fitness industry, there was no money. This place had been bleeding $500,000 a year, and there was no money for reinvestment. I came in there with my back to the wall, very few resources, and it was like you're either going to lope along and run this thing till the oxygen is gone, or you're going to find a way to turn it around. Well, the answer to me was simple. There was no other option. And by getting people on board, by helping them realize that this mattered and this is what we were going to do to make this better. Nobody wanted to fail. Nobody on that team wanted to struggle, right? So it's like, okay, well, here's what we can do. And by getting them involved or even asking them, what do you think we can do? Let's put some of your ideas into place. I offered to share and get behind their careers. If you stick with me, like I want to hang on to my keepers, if you stick with me for 2 years and help me get this thing straight, help us get this thing straight, I'll help you with whatever else you want to do. I mean, those are all just examples. And by everybody caring, understanding, and having input on what they wanted to, how things could be and what they could do to make a difference, that was the spark. That was the genesis. And in less than a year, the place was breaking even. And in less than another year, it was making $500,000 a year, $1 million turnaround with no additional investment and just the intention and communication, getting people on board. Same facility, same members, same market, everything else. So that I think, I credit communication with that and getting people involved because people support what they help to create. People want to be part of something successful.
I love it. And okay, so 1, decide to change. 2, look for options and risks. 3, put on the blinkers, right? Communicate that change is happening.
Yep.
And then we're on 4 now, right?
Yep.
4th and final.
4th is actually make the change. And believe it or not, that's the other biggest reason why change in business struggles or fails is because the implementation is partial, half-hearted, for any host of reasons. It either doesn't. You have you ever seen those people running down the road with their turn signal on and they never change?
Oh yeah.
And they leave you wondering, like, when is this happening? I had a client 6 or 7 years ago who signaled a big renovation to the customers and that this club was going to get an overhaul and a facelift and upgrade, and like 60 days before they were supposed to go with it, they lost their financing. And he didn't come clean with the customers. He didn't, he took a gallant shot. He tried to replace it, did everything you think you could do, but he never came back and said, oops, we've hit a speed bump. So 1 year, 2 years, almost 3 years. That's when I was called in, like damage control. Well, like it's like a hurricane went through here 3 years ago. Like, can you clean this up? Right. And I think it took him another 2 years before he finally, owned up with it, but to build the morale of the team and to get them to, communicate that they needed this change just didn't happen. It eventually did, right? But the slow implementation or the failure to implement is a big part of it. So the last step of changing lanes is there's 3 pieces to it. First is to plan to start. So you've thought it through, you made a good decision, you've looked for options and risks, you've communicated to all the people at hand. Let's plan to start. How do we get this thing off to a flying start? Right? It's kind of the same as when you're changing lanes, you turn the wheel and step on the gas, right? So now you're veering into the next lane and you're accelerating or decelerating, whatever you need to do, right? So you've started, but the second piece of that is to actually plan to finish. And this is something that's almost never done. I mean, I could almost say it's never done. Like most people don't plan to finish their change. They plan to, if you're lucky, they plan to start. But a part of this process is planning to finish. What are the milestones we're going to hit? When is this going to be done? How are we going to track our progress? Again, not extensive. You can go through this in a few hours once you know the process, but you plan to finish. And again, you've got the people on the team that are helping plan to finish, right? The very last piece of step 4 is you actually imagine the future. So if this is something you want to have accomplished by the middle of next year or the end of next year, there's a little exercise. I say it's 6 to 12 months from now. Describe what life is like with your change in place. It's a tactic called projection. And once they project themselves into the future, whether it's the person who's going to be leading the change or the people who need to be on board to help the change, and they go through that exercise, it's a tangible experience. You imagine how much better life will be when this doesn't suck, or when this is working great, or when the customers are coming through the door, and it provides that additional motivation to finish the change. It's kind of the equivalent of changing lanes, pulling into the new lane, and actually keeping up the speed that you should. I don't know if this only happens to me, or maybe it happens to you too, but you ever had somebody change lanes in front of you and not go any faster than they were going before?
Yeah, it's infuriating. Yep.
Yeah. That doesn't just happen in Baltimore, right? That happens elsewhere. So that drives me crazy. It's almost part of the genesis of this program. So when you do this with your business, if you start a change, finish it. Like if you're supposed to be going faster, go faster. One of the big failures here is owners or business leaders, the person leading the change runs into some resistance, or they find a challenge. They come across a challenge they didn't anticipate, probably because they didn't ask the right questions in step 2, or they didn't communicate well in step 3. Now they got these challenges and the whole thing just stalls. Another issue is the shiny object syndrome, where they started that one. Okay, that's going. Now let's start this one. And now let's start this one. And we wind up getting 7 things started and nothing finished, right? I run into that a lot as I'm working with businesses and business leaders. And it's not like you can't do more than one thing at a time, but let's make sure we finish each lane change. The only thing worse than changing lanes and not speeding up is changing lanes twice and still not speeding up. Now you really got a line of ticked off people behind you. And that's the equivalent of your team. Like, if you've ever been riding with someone who did that, you're sitting you're riding shotgun, and they just change lanes and they're going slow, and you see the people like you start shrinking down in your seat because you don't want the other people to see, right? Like, would you please go, right? So that's step 4, is to actually make the change.
Awesome. Some follow-up questions, like when you describe this analogy, or is it a metaphor or analogy? I always get those mixed up, but of changing lanes, right?
Right.
It makes it sound like the change is rather subtle, right? So in your mind, is change better suited in small doses, or can it be overly substantial, right? Like how big of a dose of change do leaders want to provide to their teams and to themselves, right, as an organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is as much and as fast as you need, right? It's the same when you're driving. There's times when it's only you and 1 or 2 other cars on the road, and you see the guy in front of you is going slower than you want. There's nobody alongside of you, and you just kind of ease over into the other lane and you cruise right past them. You were going at a higher speed and you just go around them, right? There's other times where you're driving in fairly thick traffic and the people in front of you start slamming on the brakes. You've got to take evasive action, right? You got to turn right now. Or other times where you're pulling onto a highway and there's a whole bunch of slow lanes in front of you. You want to be over in the fast lane. You're changing 2, 3, 4 lanes in a whack, and you're stomping on it because either you're in a hurry, or if you don't get over there now, you're going to miss your opportunity. It's the same thing in business. So the amount of change that you're doing and the pace at which you're changing is appropriate to whatever you need to make. When COVID hit, the companies needed to take evasive action now. They didn't know which way to go, which way to turn. It was, nobody had a real answer to that. So a lot of the people in peer groups and stuff were helping each other, with sharing best practices or idea brainstorming, things like that. But, the companies needed to take evasive action sometimes, in a matter of hours. I've had clients that have had to make change in a matter of hours, and others that could execute. I've got one right now that's waiting until the first quarter because they've got a busy season going on in their retail industry right now. They've got this thing all teed up. They're going to launch a whole new brand, but the whole thing is just sitting there with the motor purring, ready to go in January. So I don't know if that answered your question, but the amount of change that you need to make varies based on your situation and your sense of urgency. And that's, again, is where these 4 steps are even more important. If you hesitate to take evasive action, your business could be could be stuck sitting still in a traffic jam when it could have broken free sooner, right? If you take crazy evasive action too quickly and you do it right in front of, an inopportune moment, like you do it in front of a state police car or a motorcycle gang or something like that, you could wind up in trouble. So we have fun in the program and in the book with the analogies because there's just so many examples. There's so many real live examples that people put a smile on their face because they've been through them, they lived through them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the answer to the question that I asked, like, is really, there's so much context that needs to be put around it, right? Like, how big of a change can you handle? It's just, you're right. It's based on the situation. It's nuanced and there's a lot of things you have to take into account.
One thing that happens a lot, if I can, there's one thing I should have added is that a lot of times this unlocks the resistance, what you're talking about right now. So one of the reasons people resist change is that they're uncertain about either how to do it or what the outcome is going to be, or they're not confident that they can succeed. And I see this a lot. And when we get to largely in step 2, where they're looking for options and risks, and they realize that one of the questions in step 2 is how much change will it take to make progress? Right? And just to do better than you're doing now. Sometimes that's all a company needs, is they need to do better than they're doing now and then keep doing better for a period of time and they'll hit their goals. Other times they need to make more progress, but you first have to just start doing better. And then you can make another change later and another change after that. It's kind of the equivalent of taking one lane at a time and gradually working your way over to the fast lane, right? So I can think of one business leader in particular. He was the engineering director for a national, multi-million-dollar company, 8-figure company, and he needed to overhaul his whole department. And he was stuck. He was like, what's the word? He was like immobilized, and he couldn't get this change going because he couldn't see how he could get this major transformation done. He was paralyzed, is the word I was groping around for. And once he realized that he could take these changes one at a time, he could get over to here and then size up the situation from there and then and it sounds intuitive, but this is a senior business leader. This guy was in his late 50s, been in the industry for decades, and was just totally couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger and make the change because he couldn't see how he could get all the way over there. So he just stayed where he was. And once he realized that he's actually achieved the goal and passed the reins on to his successor in less time than he originally planned to make the change, because he just did it in what you were just talking about. He took it a phase at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. I remember too, when we first connected, Tim, you had mentioned, maybe we've kind of touched on it, but you had identified 3 fundamental types of change, right? Can you shed some light on what those are?
Yeah, this is worth understanding. Is it helps put context on it. Again, change is like a cloudy day or some like people roll it all together. And it's useful to know there's 3 basic types of change. There's the change that's put upon us, right? The change that happens. So like a pandemic, right? Economic swings, government regulations, a new competitor moves in. These changes happen to us. We have nothing to say about them. This has happened, deal with it, right? And then there's like, if you run a snow plowing company and it doesn't snow, or if you run a snow plowing company and all of a sudden there's a blizzard, like 3 blizzards in 1 month, right? Those are all changes that we have to deal with, right? Then there's the second type of change, is the changes that we initiate. We decide to go from being a personal trainer to opening our own studio, or we decide from having our fitness center to opening another one or turning it into a chain or a franchise, right? We decide that we're going to do something. And so now that change is self-imposed, and we have to figure it out. We want to buy our real estate or sell our real estate, whatever the case may be. We want to move from Spokane to Virginia, right? Those are changes that we initiate. The third type of change is sort of in between those two. It's change that we have to deal with, or that we have an opportunity to deal with because of something that we did or didn't do, right? So we didn't train our people well, and so now we have to do something to buoy our sales, right? Or we hired this person without looking close enough at them, and now they're running antagonistic to our culture. Sometimes, like one of our, when we launched our own facility back in '96, we had a grand design for a big wellness center. We couldn't assemble all the financial resources we needed to do the whole thing. So we started with just a full-blown multi-purpose fitness center. And then a year in, we were beating all of our targets. So we raised the money and we opened an aquatic facility. So through the design and the development and the marketing of that aquatic facility, our business more than doubled in less than a year. It just took off like crazy, right? So the water was a huge thing. That was something we decided to do. We decided to add the aquatic facility, and all of a sudden, wham, we didn't have enough fitness area, and we had to add staff, and we had to, now I was dealing with all these changes. Things were going so fast. We were hanging on to a tiger by the very tip of its tail. We had to plan the next renovation and grow. We wound up growing 2 more times before we were done. So those are examples of changes that you do that you have to deal with because of something that you did or didn't do. You either did something really well and you got more than you bargained for, or you didn't do it well enough and now you're struggling. So those are the 3 basic types of change.
Yeah, excellent. Kind of a last question on change, because it's a fascinating topic. I mean, there's not a single person on this planet, and definitely nobody who's listening, who doesn't experience change, right? It's just part of the human experience. Sometimes I find that maybe I enjoy change too much, right? That maybe I'm doing too much of that. So is there a case where you can have too much change within an organization or a business or an individual, or is the change that needs to be happen is like, stop making so much change?
Well, you kind of answered the question there. So I think that if there's a boundary on how much change, it would be when your progress stalls or struggles. You don't actually enjoy or capitalize on the virtues of what you intended to change in the first place. So if you change to make things better, but you take on too much change that you don't finish the things you started, or that you're causing consternation or stress for everybody else around you, you're having fun launching all these things and everybody else is running around with their hair on fire trying to keep up with the changes you got, or their life gets more stressful. Then somewhere in there's a line that's been crossed. Somebody stepped out of bounds or is still out of bounds and running. So I think that yes, there can be too much change. One of the very first consulting assignments I ever had with a client in Sydney, Australia, I was delighted to go over there. I was honored and it was really cool. When I got there, what I found was that the guy that hired me was the challenge, because he just was changing things left, right, and center. And the team was counting on me to reel him in a little bit. And so, using human nature and stuff and letting him see that happened, it happened pretty quickly. But that was a perfect example of where the guy was you wake up every morning. The total entrepreneur was always coming up with new ideas and new things. Couldn't see a single reason not to charge ahead with it. Another guy I worked with 20 years later did the same thing. And every time he came up with a new idea, his rationalization to his team was, well, it's just this one little thing. What's the problem? And he never looked at the fact that they were already handling 47 other little things that he had given them in the last 38 days. Right. So yeah, there's whether you call it a blind spot or maybe just sometimes business leaders' eyes are bigger than their stomachs or bigger than their team can digest. That this is where the looking for options. One of the risks is that your people are suffering from what's the word I'm looking at? Task overload. They've got so much on their plate that they feel responsible for finishing on your behalf from the last stuff that you started, that they can't do justice to the new stuff you want. So sometimes in there, we teach them how to negotiate with their leader. They come back and say, okay, well, what is it that you're okay with not doing? Or for the leader to have a little better filter, or maybe ask questions and communicate with, do we have the bandwidth for this right now? That happened a lot during COVID, by the way. The bandwidth thing was a huge issue during COVID.
Oh, yeah. It's I see that a lot. I mean, I see it reflected in myself. When I do that, I don't manage any huge teams, but moving too fast, trying too many things, and in your mind, you feel like it all makes sense, right? And then but to your team or to the people you work with, it just seems bananas. It's just no one can keep up, right? And I actually see that more commonly than anything now that I think about it. But it's really interesting, and there's I love that you've taken so many years of experience, Tim, and boiled down into a simple framework. Because when you can explain something in a simple way, right? That's kind of when you've mastered it, right? Because like that's the point. Like, and that happens in coaching in any form. It's like once you can sit down and explain to someone in a very simple way with a very simple story, um, a concept or an idea that's pretty complex and common, then I feel like you've really nailed something. And I presume that's why you sat down and actually wrote a book.
Yeah.
So maybe tell us about the book and how you're going about it. Are you doing like a speaking tour with it, or give us some insights on what you're doing with that.
Well, no speaking tour yet, but I'm happy to start in Montana if there's an opportunity out there. But the book actually just came out a couple of weeks ago. I don't want to date the podcast, but it launched on November 14th in 2023, and it opened as a bestseller in 4 different categories on Amazon, and so far
nice,
it's gotten
man.
nothing
Congrats.
but 5-star reviews. So that it's hitting it's hitting business leaders, I think, at all levels. It's written as a parable, so it's a story of a business leader who's struggling with underperformance and is trying to figure out where to start. Like it's like being in slow traffic and what should I do right from here? And he's frustrated. He's got all the same frustrations, but he runs into a mentor who reveals this simple approach to change, and it's just like driving. So he challenges him to examine his driving, and they, over 4 days and 4 lunches, he learns the 4 steps and winds up leading his team to higher levels of engagement, higher level of new surge of productivity, and eventually they're tasked with helping the whole company with that. So that's the basis of the story. And you talk about simplifying things. That's how I've spent most of my career, is trying to take things that are overcomplicated and make them simple so that they're easy to implement, easy for people to embrace. And I've really enjoyed doing that with this book. My next steps with the book are to get on more podcasts and try to spread the word this way, make it available to people to read and hopefully apply in their own, in their own scenario, regardless of what industry they're in or what level of leadership they're at. If there's something that they want to accomplish, if there's something that they want to improve, they want to make progress, there's a very simple way that they can use for the rest of their career to get from where they are to where they want to be. And then for people who want more, I have a coaching program. There are some people that, want to work with me. They maybe have something very specific that has a lot of consequences or whatever. And it's a 4-week program. And so it doesn't take a ton of time. And I help them actually work on the thing that they want to improve. So right now that's it. I do think I'll be starting some speaking things, probably with some local and regional groups here, and then take it from there. I joined a group of authors that are like working on getting speaking going. So that's, hopefully something on my path here in 2024.
Oh, fantastic. And I love that you wrote it in a parable. I mean, some of my all-time favorite, most read books are, like The Go-Giver, Who Moved My Cheese, like these ones that are, they take really powerful messages and they wrap them into a story that's easily digestible and not long, right? It's like, boom, to the point. You can get it done in a day and you never forget. I think I've gifted each one of those books at least 30, 40 times each. So great job. And Tim, if people want to get a hold of you, if they want to learn more online, where would you like them to go?
You bet. Well, the website is changinglanesapproach.com. And from there, you can check the tab and look at the coaching program, or it's changinglanesapproach.com, I think, /book to see about the book, or the book's available on Amazon. You just go to Amazon and type in Changing Lanes for Business. That's the title of the book, Changing Lanes for Business. There's a couple of sponsored books that come up first, but last I checked, it was showing up third on the list. And you can get it in Kindle, paperback, or hardcover. I'll be doing an Audible version of it probably before the end of the first quarter. I was talking with the publisher this morning about that, but right now it's available in 3 formats. And in there are links that they can use there's actually, we talked a little bit about overcoming resistance to change, which is something that's pervasive, right? If you're doing a change, there's resistance to either avoid or overcome. And in the book, there's an offer for any reader to get my, it's called A Business Leader's Guide to Overcoming Resistance to Change. A little bit of a long title, but it's actually a process. It's a PDF that you get, and it shows 5 different ways that all work to overcome resistance to change. Any one of those can help expedite your progress. If you do 2 or 3 of them, hang on, because you're gonna be eliminating resistance and friction like crazy. So that's one of the benefits of being in the book.
Awesome. Well, we'll put all that in the show notes. And yeah, this has been really interesting. I've really enjoyed it. I can see how this has already played out so many times in my own business, but how I can improve and change his life. So, Tim, thank you spending some time with me on your Friday morning, and it's been a great pleasure.
My pleasure. I'd be happy to just offer a Zoom link that you can put in the show notes if anybody wants to book a call to just get more information. Or this time of year, people are looking for something they want to get for their leadership team or something, if they want a batch of books or something, or even talk about a coaching program for their business. I'd be happy to do that, so they can book directly with me.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, Tim Rhode.
Thank you, Eric.